Welcome to Dementia-Friendly Prince George's County, Maryland Northern Sector's webinar series for caregivers. Today's topic is legal and financial issues in long-term care planning. This video is sponsored by Prince George's County Government and the Department of Family Services.
Welcome. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us give this presentation. I am, as Haley mentioned, an estate planning and elder law attorney, and I practice. My office is in College Park. I assist clients in preparing the legal tools that are required in the event there's a need for long-term care. That's one of the things that we do, one of the important things that we do. And we help with planning to preserve independence and resources. So why have we created this presentation? There's a lot of misapprehension, a lot of misunderstanding and miseducation about what can and cannot be done, and what should and should not be done when it comes to planning in the event there's a long-term care need. It can be a dangerous minefield if you do not know what you're doing. That's something I really emphasize when I speak about this subject. This is not a do-it-yourself project, and it is very important that you have competent advisors around you. This is one of the facets of life that most people don't want to address, and I would say that for many, it's harder to face the need for long-term care than it is, and than it is to face death. So we want to help just sort of guide you through, give you some basic understanding so that you can move forward. We want to provide you this information, and so some part of what we present should be useful to you, but be mindful that this is not a webinar that's providing legal advice or financial advice, just information.
I would just add to that before we move to the next slide that both Cheryl and I have had a lot of experience with people who have both the sense of denial and procrastination. I think all people in our profession face that. A lot of the public feels like, well, nothing's going to happen to me, or I'll eventually get around to dealing with it. And then the days, the months, the years go by, something happens. That's when we get a call. Cheryl constantly getting calls about a variety of legal documents. I certainly get a lot of questions if we're talking about long-term care about, am I able to obtain a policy, and am I able to afford a policy? And there, that often coincides with how long have you waited before you put something in place. Now, there are, again, certain approaches in a crisis, but we both believe that it's much better to plan up front. And so we salute all of you who are here on this presentation because you're taking the first steps to doing just that. So with that, we can go on to the next slide. And there are really a lot of issues associated with the long-term care episode. But first of all, one should know the main purposes of doing long-term care planning and perhaps putting a long-term care insurance policy in place, or at least being sure you've done your financial planning. It's because you possibly want to protect your assets or make sure there are assets should you need to have a long-term care situation. And there's really a significant body of information which shows a lot of people will face a long-term care situation. Perhaps some of you on the broadcast tonight, the presentation, are experiencing it right with your own family members at this point. So you could both protect assets through a long-term care policy. You can also make sure you're going to have some money to pay for care should you need it. And the reasons, of course, that we want to start putting something in place is because we all know that There's a great fear of being dependent. No one wants to be dependent. In survey after survey, people are saying, I do not wish to be a burden to my family. So certainly having a plan in place to minimize that burden is certainly very helpful, even though it's a labor of love. And caregivers will say it's a labor of love, but it's still a great challenge. So we don't want to put our families in difficult situations. The challenge of caregiving is extremely difficult. I've spoken to a lot of people when I'm talking to them about long-term care insurance, and they say, well, my daughter lives a couple of towns over, and she told me she's going to take care of me if I have need. But we don't know what that level of need is. We don't know what the other responsibilities are that that daughter is dealing with. So you need to be cognizant of that. Just as an aside, most surveys will say at least 80% of people express their desire to remain at home if at all possible. There are reasons where it is good to plan to be in an assisted living community. And of course, no one expresses the desire to be in a nursing home. So that's just something that eventually may occur, and there's nothing we can really do about it except plan for that. So, serious financial implications of paying for long-term care, which we'll be getting into in subsequent slides. Research shows that 70% of people will likely need some level of assistance. We don't know how long and how extreme, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that, yes, it could happen, and get over the issue of denial. And then, of course, we also might face the issue of eventually having to physically move to another setting. So those are just some things we need to begin thinking about when we're planning for long-term care.
And what I say as follow-up is that often we don't want to plan, we delay, we procrastinate, and that's because we don't have enough information. And information impedes us from making decisions. So hopefully you'll get some information from this presentation, so you'll have something to work with in moving forward. And that's always my goal, to help you move forward in the planning process. Move to the next slide.
Well put.
Okay. So presently, 80% of those needing long-term care rely principally on family, friends, and community. And this model has worked. However, it's a model that's worked probably 3 generations ago and before. It is not a model that is working well today. It's a frail and fragile model. At one time, people could rely on family, church, and community for support, but today we are a different society. And also, as we are able to live longer with disabling conditions that require support or care. And so that was not the case many years ago, or 3 generations ago. People had long-term care issues, and generally they died. They did not survive for a long period of time. So that's something to think about when you are looking at relying primarily on family and friends and the community. We can go to the next slide.
Okay, so as Cheryl mentioned, 80% of care is provided in what we call in an informal way: family, friends, community members. Research says that the other 20% of care being received in the community is through sources of paid care. The 4 main levels that people are aware of and that receive care from are home care companies or agencies or individual practitioners, adult daycare, where you can go to a center for the day and then come back at night, assisted living communities, which have become very visible in the community and have experienced great growth. And then, of course, nursing homes, which 20 to 30 years ago were the main way that people received long-term care. So with that, I'll go on to the next.
Well, and how is it paid for? It's primarily private. You're paying for it. We have public funding, private funding, but it's really private funding for the most part. Depending on, it could be private funding. Is Mark, you're going to talk about at some point, the types of ways you can pay for it using leverage. You are responsible for paying for your cost of care.
That's absolutely right. And that's something that's often emphasized, is that still a large number of the population does not understand that Medicare does not pay for long-term care. Now, Medicaid will pay for long-term care, but only if you're at the nursing home level. And we'll get into the complexities a bit before the presentation ends. But basically, for those four types of formal long-term care, home care, adult daycare, assisted living, nursing home, people do not generally appreciate the expenses associated with it unless they've had a family member who's gone through it and they had to start experiencing those costs. And all of a sudden, oh my God, I had no idea how expensive this is. What's it going to do to the family finances? How is it going to drain the assets? Are we lucky enough to even have money to pay for home care? The typical quote you will see, if we're talking about, 8 hours a day throughout the year, you're talking about at least $50,000 a year. So if you're calling a home care agency, having someone in providing care, let's say from 8:30 to 5, you're going to end up with a bill of at least $50,000 a year. That's a significant amount of money for someone to come up with on top of other expenses they have for operating a home. Adult daycare is probably the best deal in town. You're talking about, let's say, approximately $25,000 a year for 8:30 to 5 at the adult daycare center. Again, a person will then go home to an environment. Often, for instance, a frail senior will be living with their adult children. They'll be dropped off at adult daycare, spend the day there, and then go back home and live with an adult child, assuming they can't really care for themselves in their own home. Assisted living costs is starting, and this is the very low end, at $4,000 a month, typically more from the $6,000 to $8,000 a month. Doesn't take much math to recognize you're talking about a significant amount of money. Of course, it can depend on the level of care needed. Just to, very quickly, a lot of assisted living communities will quote you a price, but then you'll also find out that they may have a 4 or 5 level price scale, meaning you go in with a minimal amount of needs, it's one level. Once you start needing a greater level of staffing, they're going to need to charge you more because they're paying more staffing hours to make it happen. So that you need to be aware of the differences in the levels of care needed. Then also, if you need memory care, there are actually some assisted living and nursing home settings specifically focused on what's now popularly called memory care, which is basically for those with more advanced dementia. And then, of course, the more well-known issue at this point is Alzheimer's care. And of course, the Alzheimer's Association does a great job educating us about the challenges of that. AARP also has a lot of good literature about caregiving, about Alzheimer's, etc. Then you get to the nursing home level, and $9,000 a month at the low end. It go as high as 12, and actually in the DMV in our immediate area, the cost can even range a little higher, up from 11 to 14,000. So this is serious business, and that's why we say if you're doing long-term care planning, one needs to figure out, worst case, what happens if I need care? How am I going to pay for it? Who's going to help me pay for it? Is the insurance company going to help me pay for it if I can afford to have some kind of insurance policy in place? In addition to these formal costs, there are other costs associated with aging and care needs. There's medical copays and premiums. That's really more associated with Medicare costs, which we're not going to spend too much time getting into tonight. That's a whole presentation in itself. There may be costs associated with hiring a geriatric or life care manager to help you coordinate care for a loved one. There may be home modifications. Durable medical equipment and supplies can be quite expensive. And of course, we advise, and in a lot of cases, a person needs an elder law attorney, and there's a cost obviously associated with that consultation as well. Anything to add there, Cheryl?
No, you covered it.
All right. Try
that
to,
we just don't anticipate.
Straight out.
Mm-hmm. We can go to the next slide.
So with that, we can go on to the next.
So we're going to touch on, we're not going to be able to give you everything or even a lot because there's so much here, but we're going to touch on some of the legal issues associated with independence and asset preservation. We're going to talk a little bit about the information about long-term care funding options for now and for the future. And we're going to help you put the pieces together because we're going to have a case study that will show you some of the planning that can go into preparing in the event there's a long-term care need. Okay, we can move to the next slide. So from an elder law perspective, we're wanting to make sure that you maintain your independence and as well as preserve your assets. And the best way of doing it is to have a plan in place so that if you become incapacitated, you have someone who can step in and make decisions for you. Oftentimes, planning doesn't take place until after there's a long-term care event or the opportunity to plan doesn't present itself until there's a long-term care event. And as a result, unless there are tools in place, the planning can't be done. So I want to talk to you about some of the tools that we find that are essential for you to have in place. One are your powers of attorney. And I believe these tools are what everyone needs, regardless of your age. If you're over 18, these are tools that you need. Durable powers of attorney. That means powers of attorney that allow someone to step in and make decisions for you, both for personal and for medical decisions. And if you don't have the one for personal and financial power of attorney in place, then you may cut off the opportunity for advanced planning if it's needed in your case. But even without that, no legal decision can be made for you without a power of attorney. And if you don't have a power of attorney, then the only way a legal decision can be made is through guardianship. And I'm going to just give you just a brief statement about guardianship. It's something that you should avoid like the plague. Most people don't need guardianship, and most guardianships are the result of not having a plan in place. What is guardianship? Guardianship is a legal process that the court has structured so that if you become incapacitated, then there are rules around what will happen. The court will make a determination that if you are incapacitated, that you are, and if the court makes that determination, then you literally become a ward of the state. A ward of the state. You come under the court's domain. You lose most of your ability to make your own decisions. And the court will appoint a guardian. Hopefully that guardian will be a member of your family. However, that's not necessarily the case. It could be a stranger, someone with my credentials, a lawyer, who doesn't know anything about your family dynamics and has to step in and take over your life. You don't want that. And that's why we just urge you to make sure you have a financial and personal power of attorney in place to avoid that circumstance. So powers of attorney for personal and financial decisions and one for medical decisions, essential. Advance directives, what are they? If you are not able to make your own decisions, you may want to say in advance how you want them made. That's what advance directives do. They allow you to speak um, into the future about how you want to live, what kind of care you want to have for yourself. What are HIPAA authorizations? HIPAA authorizations are those authorizations that give specifically designated loved ones the access to your medical information. Yes, your agent under a healthcare power of attorney does have that access, but that is just for that person. You will also want to give access to medical information to other family members and or close friends. And the reason for that is not so that they can necessarily have control, because they don't have control over your healthcare decision making, but they can get vital information about you. Something as simple as what happens if you're in a hospital. Can one of your children call and find out how you're doing? That's what a HIPAA will allow to happen. And um, then you also want to make sure that you are looking at the living benefits that are available to you and long-term care options. The other tools I'm not going to get into, those are what we call below ground tools. The ones I just referred to are above ground tools, because those are the tools, the planning tools that you need so that while you're living your life, you can have the quality of life that you need, the quality of life that you want, excuse me. The other tools are those tools that allow you to determine how assets are transferred to beneficiaries. So I'm going to, let's see. Um, oh, yeah, we want to talk about the ability to transfer assets, but that's more about Medicaid, retitling assets, using equity in home. These are all tools. I think we'll get to that as we go through the case study. But if I leave you with anything, I want to leave you with the urgency. You have a current power of attorney. It's important to get one, not just any power of attorney, but a power of attorney that allows your agent to make a multiplicity of decisions that many powers of attorney don't have. So I'm going to stop there. I think, Mark, you wanted to say something.
Well, I just wanted to add, one thing quickly before we go to the next slide, which is there's never, again, we talk about the urgency, the denial. But when you talk about these legal issues, something that strikes me because I see it and hear it all the time is there are certain things we can't plan for. You're at one point and you say, I'll get there, I'll talk about it. When you're talking about these legal documents, someone has a significant accident, unfortunately happens every day. Strokes. It's just a large number of strokes in the community. The statistics are staggering. Again, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's what planning's all about, saying what could happen, and if it does happen, am I prepared? And then also the onset of dementia. All of a sudden, someone starts having trouble thinking things through. And if you don't have these kinds of documents and you need them at that point to deal with, at least with people with those immediate kinds of issues, then it becomes a much more difficult situation, or as Cheryl would call it, crisis planning instead of, forward-thinking planning. So that's just my thoughts about that.
And one of the things I want to add to this is that your goal is to maintain your independence. And so with these tools in place, you can be independent um, based on your capacity. And even if you lose complete capacity, you have put in place, I'm going to just use the word a machine, your community, your agents under your power of attorney, your close associates. You put in place people who will make decisions on your behalf as you would want them to be made. So you are still actively involved, even if you're still involved, even if you cannot make direct decisions, because you've got the persons there who are going to make those decisions on your behalf. Okay. Thank you.
Let's move forward because time travels quickly.
Okay. So we wanted to talk to you.
Set the stage here.
We want to talk to you about. Let me just close this. How do I do this? There we go. I'm going to minimize this. Oops, I minimized it out. Minimized myself out. Wait, let me try it again. I'm sorry. Maybe that's what I do to minimize. Okay, great. So we're going to just give you this scenario. Some of these issues may or may not apply, but we're going to show you how the Smith family worked through some of these issues. Arthur and Margaret Smith, husband and wife. Arthur is 75 and he has mild dementia. He is a Vietnam War veteran, and that's significant. Margaret is 70. She has arthritis, which limits some of her activities. Their only child is Mary. She's 50. And Mary has moved in with her parents to cut down on overall family expenses and to give assistance. She assists with household chores and helps her father with activities.
What's called instrumental activities
Activities, daily living, instrumental activities of daily living. He can do a lot, but there's some things that he can't do. And Mark, you just tell us what instrumental means before we close out this section.
Well, it means it's not, I'll just simply quickly put that in while we're talking about it. Hands-on care, it's the support activities of daily living, like budgeting, like cooking, like cleaning, like the activities of daily life that aren't like feeding, toileting, etc. So they're the support types of activities.
He can, for the most part, carry on his own activities of daily living, but because of his dementia, there's some things that he can't do, as you said, Mark. Such as budgeting, preparing food. So she left a full-time job and now has a home-based business. Her parents provide some financial assistance to her. They project that at some time in the near future, Mr. Smith will need assistance with activities of daily living. And so, Mark, would you please enumerate those activities of daily living?
Okay, typically when, especially for purposes of, say, long-term care insurance, defining chronic illness, they're talking about bathing, dressing, grooming, toileting, feeding oneself, ambulating, meaning being able to get across the room, getting from bed, also transferring, very similar, being able to get out of bed, to walk or to get into a chair. And now, more often than not, they're also recognizing incontinence as a activity of daily living, somewhat related, of course, to toileting.
Okay. So Mr. and Mrs. Smith have these assets. They have their home, which is paid for, and $300,000 in cash and retirement accounts. The Smiths, this is what the Smiths want to accomplish. They want to ensure that they're taken care of and maintain their independence, and that the home is preserved for Mary, and that she has resources for herself. So we can go to the next slide.
Okay, so with that as an overview, Cheryl and I are going to try to tie it to the specifics of the Smiths as well. But given that, just to bring some reality to the situation. A lot of us may have similar types of situations in one way or another. There are a variety of things that people need to think about for long-term care funding options. First and foremost, assets and income. Some people may say, well, I have a decent living, I have a pension, I have a certain amount of savings, I'm going to be able to live just fine. But the big elephant in the room, if you will, is what happens if you need to start paying someone to receive formal long-term care. So you need to make that decision on your own, thinking about the assets and income you have. I might also point out you need to think of it in terms of the value in a post-tax manner. So you have $100,000 in a 401k or a pension, an IRA, something of that sort. Well, you need that $100,000 to pay for care, but it was tax deferred. So to take that money out to pay for care is going to mean you have to pay taxes on it first. So that 100,000 may be 60 or 70. So one must keep that in mind as well. Home equity lines of credit and reverse mortgages. Neither Cheryl or I are experts in that. There are a lot of reverse mortgage people out there these days. You see a lot of advertisements on television. It's something where you have some assets sunk into your home and you want to get them out via a reverse mortgage, for instance, to then help you pay for long-term care. It's a good possibility depending on, what kind of assets you have built up in your house. There are good reverse mortgages. There are bad reverse mortgages like anything else. But people shouldn't say, oh, I heard a terrible story about a reverse mortgage and someone got, taken, their home got taken from them. Well, it's possible if you enter into the wrong kind of situation. One must be educated. Again, that's something you need to learn about and think about as an option. Medicare, as I was mentioning before, Medicare does not pay for long-term care. It will only pay for up to the first 100 days outside of a hospital. So that will generally be in a skilled nursing facility or a rehab facility. So let's say you get transferred over, you had an incident, you're in the hospital. Well, if it becomes so, days 21 through 100, days 1 through 20 will get paid for by Medicare if you had a 3-day prior hospitalization. You're then transferred over, days 1 through 20 in a skilled nursing facility or rehab covered. Days 21 to 100, you're responsible for copays. That's where Medicare supplement plans come in. But the message for today is that it is not a long-term care solution. On day 101, you're on your own. Veteran benefits, I'm sorry?
I was going to say it's important to know it's up to 100 days and there's no guarantee that you have that coverage. Okay.
Right. So if your copay is $185 a day for days 21 through 100, well, that's $15,000 worth just for that. But again, the bigger message for this presentation is it's not going to be long-term care. And unless you end up on Medicaid, which means you've spent down, or there are some other ways of doing Medicaid planning, and that would only cover nursing home. Unfortunately, nursing homes are the last part of the long-term care spectrum that people want to be in if they can help it. So it's not a great planning tool anyway. Cheryl mentioned that Mr. Smith was a veteran, and so I'm going to ask Cheryl, after I just do a quick synopsis of long-term care insurance, to address veterans benefits and personal care agreements. But so the main way people these days are planning to look at long-term care funding is through a long-term care insurance option. There are a lot of options. One needs to, like everything else, educate oneself. That's why we're here, but this format doesn't allow much time to really delve into the details. That's why, of course, we're going to tell you at the end for some of the complexities of this presentation that you could certainly feel free to contact us to get a lot more information. I have just a tremendous amount of articles and detailed information about this. But there's both traditional long-term care insurance, which up to about 5 years ago, that's what it was, traditional long-term care insurance. The two major objections to traditional long-term care insurance is use it or lose it. So you pay your premiums for a number of years. Well, what happens if I pass? Will my spouse, my adult children get any money back? The answer is no. Straight insurance. So that's a big objection. And another big issue we run into is, can I pay for it when I will need it most? You can afford the premiums at one point in your life. All of a sudden, premiums may increase. That's the second objection. They can increase your premiums over time, and then you may start having less income. And now you're worried you may have to give up your long-term care insurance during a period of time when you most need it. A big problem. Second way of paying to overcome these objections are called hybrid policies. Hybrid meaning it combines two functions. You can either buy a policy that's a life insurance policy with long-term care, or actually an annuity with long-term care. You can reposition some money from an annuity. There are tax advantages of doing it, and then have some money to pay for long-term care if you need it. So, there are different payment options for these types of policies, but be aware when you talk about long-term care insurance, there's traditional policies, there's hybrid policies, there's actually policies that have true long-term care riders. They're structured just like a long-term care policy. There are a lot of companies are now offering life insurance with what they call accelerated death benefit or chronic illness riders. There's a number of those kind of policies out there. They can be a useful option, but they're not really long-term care. So any agents that are saying you can have the best of both worlds by buying this life insurance policy and you can use it for long-term care, well, you got to make sure that it's a true long-term care rider, or else really truly understand how they're creating formulas by which to pay out for chronic illness riders. So that's as far as I can go on that. Cheryl, I'm going to ask you to quickly address the veterans agreement.
I'm going to talk about the veterans benefits. For a veteran, there are 3 different programs to be aware of. One is the pension. Some of you probably have heard of Aid in Attendance, which is part of a pension program. This is a benefit for war. This is a special and a unique benefit for wartime veterans and their surviving spouse. We'll talk about the veteran first. So a veteran who served during a period of war and meets some other criteria, but the key is to have served during a war, can receive up to almost $2,300 a month in tax-free income. $2,300 if that veteran is married. Let's see, if that veteran is single, almost $2,000 a month. And that, even though we've pulled out and shown you the high cost of care, those benefits can go an extremely long way toward keeping a person at home. That just helps to help pay for care costs. It's a really just a tremendous benefit to have. It also helps assist with assisted living costs. Actually, quite a few different costs. As we talked about adult daycare, it even can assist with nursing home care. But the big dent with the pension benefit is that it helps with in-home care and assisted living care. Then there is compensation. That's where a veteran incurred a injury that was related to service. And so that particular veteran will get a rating, a disability rating. And if it's as high as, I believe, 70% and above, that will help, that will allow you to obtain long-term care in a nursing home or any other community, and the VA will pay for it. So if you or a loved one it was rated as disabled and is receiving compensation, two things you want to look at, and one is that benefit, can that benefit, that rating be increased? Want to get to at least 70%, probably closer to 80% disability. So compensation is related to a service-related injury. Then I want to just mention the VA healthcare system. This is something that we don't take um, enough advantage of. If you were a veteran, any veteran can enroll into the VA healthcare system and still maintain his or her own healthcare um, providers. But if you're in the VA healthcare system, there are benefits that are available to you. And if you're 65 and older, remember we talked about the fact that what we're focusing on are issues involving persons 65 and older. So for those who are 65 and older, VA has a robust geriatric care program and lots of benefits, respite care, care, respite care, home care at discount, lots of benefits. So just be aware of that. And if you haven't enrolled in the VA healthcare system and you are a veteran, please do, and do so now. Then there are personal care agreements. Sometimes family wants to pay the loved one for being a caregiver, at least assist with the caregiving expenses. And so it is important that this be written down, that this is not just, I'm giving you money just because we're giving you money. You want it to be, you want a personal care agreement so that you are memorializing the arrangement between your caregiver and yourself. The reason that's important, if there is a need for Medicaid, to apply for Medicaid, then the arrangement will be seen as what it is, a paid arrangement. If you don't have it in writing, it may be, they will presume that what was paid out to the caregiver, particularly a family member caregiver, was a gift. And that has its own consequences that can prevent you from qualifying or receiving benefits under Medicaid if you apply for Medicaid. So keep in mind,
And
have just a informal arrangement, put in place a personal care agreement. And when you do,
if I'm not,
when you do that, there are tax implications. You need to make sure that taxes are being withheld. I'm going to move on. Okay.
I just wanted to quickly point out that also has relevance if you're itemizing your medical deductions for tax purposes.
Yes. That's right. That's right. Thank you, Mark. We can move on.
All right. Let's move on because the time races rapidly. So just a few long-term care funding options. Cheryl and I love to talk and do this stuff, but the time just escapes. So there are annuities actually now with long-term care benefits. You can reposition money. If you're what's called annuitizing, sometimes you're using those just for purposes of guaranteed lifetime income or a safe income stream, but there are several companies that are now offering them with long-term care benefits. So they will double the payout if you're annuitizing and getting X dollars. Let's say you're going to be getting $8,000 a year in income or 10,000. They'll double it. You'll get 20,000 a year. That's not going to pay for larger amounts of long-term care, but it's another piece of the pie, and it may at least pay for some home care assistance. There are things called life funding, and of course, there's cash values in existing policies. Some people don't even realize there's a whole life policy that's been sitting around, bought many years ago. There might be some cash values, again, that can be accessed to help pay for care. Life funding is a situation where you can sell your policy, your life insurance policy, under certain conditions and get some money out, as opposed to having to wait till a person is deceased to collect. Medicaid, again, Cheryl could probably do an hour's presentation about Medicaid if you want to speak a moment about that. And then, of course, within the Medicaid system, there's something called Medicaid compliant annuities. So just briefly, if people have a situation where someone is going to be needing nursing home care, there may be a good opportunity to shield some assets that would otherwise need to be spent down. So you can create a Medicaid compliant annuity within the context of a Medicaid plan. For instance, one of the branches of law that Cheryl participates in is called Medicaid planning. So as part of that Medicaid plan, you can implement the Medicaid compliant annuity in order to protect family assets.
So,
Anything to add?
so Medicaid is the safety net. It's the payor of last resort, and it is designed for people who are impoverished, and it will essentially pay all of the long-term care costs. And you heard the figures. Nursing home can run between $11,000 and $14,000 a month. I actually just spoke with someone in the last couple of months who they were paying $24,000 a month because of the level of care needed. So if Medicaid is there, it will pick up the lion's share of the cost. And so the question is, how does one become eligible? You have a choice. You can spend down until you are medically eligible. If you're an individual, it's $2,500. You can't have more than $2,500. There are exceptions, but I'm just going to give you the overview. And most people don't want to do that. Let me just say this: this is a reality. Medicaid is not going to cover most of your need. It may not cover most of your needs. And if you are in a family situation, if you have a spouse, you don't know whether your spouse is going to have a long-term care need. So you certainly cannot and should not be looking at spending down until you become impoverished. So that's where pre-planning comes to play. And there are three different phases of planning. It's the pre-planning that takes you outside of what we call the look-back period. There's a 5-year look-back period. So if you make certain plans, those plans will be looked at and adjustments will be made in terms of benefits. But if you plan so that it's outside of that 5-year window, then the assets you have preserved in planning will not be considered, and it will be available to assist your family in assisting you or your spouse. There is crisis planning when something happens, you're getting released and have to go into rehab, and it appears that you will not be able to go home. That's crisis planning. What do we do? How do we put a plan in place? I can assure you that even with a crisis plan, there is something that can be preserved. In fact, far more than you would think. There is also an intermediate stage called, I call it intermediate. And that's where something has happened. And although you have that 5-year, you did some planning, something has happened and we need to do some adjustment. So you have opportunities to plan, but the best plan is to plan far enough ahead that you have protected the assets you choose to protect. I'm going to stop there.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next slide because we really have 5 minutes left. So we're going to quickly take a look at the text.
So, all right. So let's talk about what could we do for the Smith family? The Smiths, they needed those power papers because they just needed that so that if anything happened to Mr. Smith, someone could step in, Mrs. Smith or their daughter could step in and make decisions. Because Mary was being paid, a care agreement would be appropriate. She becomes a paid caregiver. By the way, being a paid caregiver helps access those veteran benefits a little easier as well. You can pay for higher level of care. Let's see.
Again, I would jump in there quickly and just say if
Yes.
some of the family are being used to pay for, let's say, the first person who needs formal care is Mr. Smith. Well, now what are we going to do? Ensure that we have some protection for Mrs. Smith and the adult daughter. So they perhaps should be looking possibly at some kind of a long-term care insurance product so that some money will be set aside that can be used by them. And that's often the case when I talk to people. For instance, they'll go, well, it's too late. My husband already has a problem, so what are we going to do? They don't think that, hey, that's even more of a reason you, the spouse, ought to be looking at a policy for yourself, because if assets are going to be drained to care for your loved one, then you may need to have a benefit pool of money known as a long-term care insurance pool to help cover you when the family assets are being drained to care for your loved one. Again, we talked a little bit about if they had some money and they were interested in an annuity situation, and those are not underwritten, so people could reposition some money, get the benefit of that doubler without going through underwriting. There are other
You want to
annuities.
explain what underwriting means?
I'm sorry, I apologize. I take that for granted. Underwriting simply means they're going to be looking at your health and medical condition and see if the insurance company wants to take you on as a risk. They look at us as risks. And we're sharing our risk with the insurance company by trying to get a policy by which they agree to pay for some care if needed. But of course, they want to make sure we're not a slam dunk for needing care. So there are underwriting criteria which say if you have such and such conditions, we don't really want to share the risk with you. You're on your own, which is one reason why people should consider a long-term care insurance policy before they need it. So we're back to that denial, sense of urgency, whatever. People say, I'm fine now. I don't need long-term care now. But the point of planning is to say, if something were to happen to me, will I need it? And is the insurance company going to want to share that risk with me? And the answer, if you have an advanced health problem, is probably going to be no. But that's where you need to talk with a professional and find out. A lot of people have some kind of chronic health condition or other, but that doesn't mean they won't get approval. So that's something you need to look at carefully. So I'll come back to you in terms of, we talked about the care agreements, home care pools. We're back to next to last bullet, Cheryl, meeting future care needs for pre-planning.
Okay. So I just wanted to just say that we don't know what Mrs. Smith is going to need. So pre-planning is really important to protect and preserve the assets. Usually we do this with special needs trust for the surviving spouse. That can be done fairly simply in a will. Also, looking at irrevocable trust to hold assets and preserve benefits. There are lots of benefits you can preserve with an irrevocable trust. And there are other planning options so that assets can be preserved. We want to make sure that the home is preserved for Mary Smith, the daughter, so that um, um, when her parents are gone, she has a place. I mean, she's giving up her livelihood to take care of her parents. So we want to take a look at Mary as well. Okay, we can go to the.
I think in the interest of time, and given that there's some overlap, what I'm going to say is simply we're going to skip the next slide. But the point is, the Smith family solutions may well be very much like what your family solutions might be, or Cheryl mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, each person or family has their own set of challenges. That's why you need to do some personalized planning and see what types of arrangements and documents that we've been speaking about might be applicable to you. So if that's acceptable, Cheryl, we're going to skip the next slide and we'll just go to the final slide.
Yes.
Okay, well, okay, somehow we did that. Thank you, presenters. So, Cheryl, you want to take it?
Yeah. So we're here. We're just here for you. We will, and Mark and I have been collaborating, so we may have other webinars that delve into some specific issues. And if you need more information, you're welcome to contact Mark, and here's his information. You're welcome to contact me. You have my information. We're here to help.